In 2024, we're going to be dealing with some of the toughest economic conditions we've seen in a very long time. And that begs the question, how do we approach our own investing for the year ahead? Well, recently I got to sit down with legendary investor Guy Spier to discuss exactly that. Guy founded the Aquamarine Fund back in 1997, but you might also know him as the author of The Education of a Value Investor, or as the man that worked with Monish Pabrai to secure the winning bid for Warren Buffett's charity lunch back in 2007. It was honestly a great privilege to talk to Guy once again. In fact, we ended up talking for over 2 hours, but just quickly before I roll the tape, I just wanted to send out a reminder that we are currently looking for people to help review our new and improved investing courses that we've been working on for like the last 6 months. So if you'd be interested in free early access and you have the capacity to hop on a call with me and give us some feedback sometime across the next few weeks, then please check out the link in the description and the pinned comment. But with that said, let's get to Guy. And the first thing I asked him was quite simply, how should we be looking at the year ahead with things as they are in the stock market?
You got to explore your landscape intelligently. The landscape is different for every single person for 1,000 different reasons. First of all, the instruments that they can buy or sell are different because they have access to different markets. The size of their portfolio is different. The access to information that each individual has is different. Don't allow that voice that says, "You idiot, why are you not doing what Mike Burry is doing? Why are you not doing what Bill Ackman is doing?" Don't let that voice get to you because you have to drive your investment vehicle from the perspective that you are in.
Guy spoke to me at length about this topic. The first key step is to acknowledge your own investing landscape, and this comes back to self-awareness. You as an investor need to understand where you are along your investing journey and thus what you should be looking at as an investor. Should you be looking at mining companies in Western Australia or energy providers in India? Or should you be starting with a more passive approach? So the first step is to acknowledge what your own landscape is and that what's appropriate for some investors might not actually be right for you.
So let's just ground this a little bit. I'm imagining I'm opening up my Charles Schwab account. And so first of all, if it's a Charles Schwab account, which is a US online broker, I don't have access to every instrument. So, I'm not going to be able to buy Zimbabwe cement. I'm not going to be able to buy the Chinese drinks company Mao Tai. So already I have a landscape that's not a complete landscape. That's okay. There's plenty of things that I can look at. And then there's a dependency on my own personal knowledge. If I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody like that, and let's say I'm flush with cash, so there's 100% cash in the portfolio, and I've decided that I'm able and willing to allocate X% to equities, which I know can fluctuate. I think my first step is probably an S&P index. And I think that I would go one step further and say, okay, well, I understand that the market cap weighted index doesn't perform as well as a flat weighted index. So I'll take the flat weighted index, and Charles Schwab provides me with access to that. And then I would do that. And then I need to pause and reevaluate because now I'm in a new landscape, if you like.
So the first step is to define what your investing landscape is, be aware of your limitations, and to be comfortable with them. And this feeds into a huge topic in the value investing world, which is defining your circle of competence. But before we get to that, one thing I'm definitely not competent in is speaking another language, but that's exactly what I'm trying to do with Babbel, the sponsor of today's video, especially if I'm going to go hang out with Guy in Zurich. I'd better learn the local language. But no, while I joke about learning German, one language I actually do want to learn is French, and Babbel is helping me do just that. And the reason I chose Babbel is because it's scientifically proven to help you start learning a new language in just 3 weeks. But the thing that's great about Babbel is it teaches you real-world conversations. So lessons prep you to have practical conversations about travel or business or relationships and more. Their lessons are designed by real language teachers, and they even offer live classes, plus you get 2 free classes with your subscription. Now, Babbel has a few different subscriptions to choose from, including a lifetime subscription, so I encourage you to check which one might be right for you. And as a bonus, if you sign up with my link in the description, you can score 60% off of your subscription. So sign up with that unique link. It's risk-free with a 20-day money-back guarantee. And thanks to Babbel for sponsoring this video. But as we were saying before, a huge part of investing in the next few years is going to be sticking to your circle of competence. And importantly, not overcomplicating it.
Circle of competence expands gradually through experiences of existing businesses, and it's okay not to feel like you know everything about everything. I feel very supremely comfortable with my investment in Berkshire Hathaway, which is a very significantly sized position in my fund and has grown a lot. And there are all sorts of people who come and say, well, it's trading at a premium to book value. What if, maybe they should be split up? What happens when Warren dies? Does all that premium to book value disappear? There are all sorts of concerns. I've thought through those concerns, and I am extremely confident that I don't need to be worried about those. I could maybe claim that that's within my circle of competence, but somebody else might not feel the same way about Berkshire Hathaway, in which case, maybe the S&P is a far better way for you to start. And you start with the S&P, and then you start looking at specific businesses in the S&P, and then at some point you say, you know what, I'm comfortable owning, and I'm really just picking a name randomly out of the hat, United Healthcare. Or I'm confident, I've read about this strategy where you buy the dogs of the Dow, you buy the dogs of the S&P, and out of these 5 businesses that have performed really badly in the S&P, I actually really like this one, or I work in the industry, or so that's this nature of this changing landscape, and we have to constantly evaluate where we are in our own personal changing landscape.
So particularly in uncertain economic times, we need to ensure we stick to things that we understand well. But beyond that, I also wanted to quiz Guy on 2 topics that will be a big part of investing throughout 2024, inflation and interest rates. Now, in the US, headline inflation has recently ticked up again. So I asked Guy, if we do see ongoing inflation, how can we best protect our portfolios?
If you start living in the world of businesses and start thinking about them in inflationary environments, there is a broad diversity of businesses. And in some cases, we don't really know. We have to kind of think through the dynamics of what will happen. But to take you to the other end of the spectrum and to kind of the end point of where all this is going, a bank receives money and deposits and lends it out in a rising interest rate environment. Their net interest margins, the difference between what their funds cost for them to raise through client deposits primarily, and what they get when they loan the money out, rises. So that an interest rate in a rising interest rate environment tends to be good for banks with those kinds of balance sheets. It tends to be good for any business. The source of the revenues is denominated in nominal terms. So the beautiful thing about credit card networks is that they take a percentage of nominal amounts spent. They don't have to go and ask for price increases because they take a percentage of what the customer spends in the store. So as people succeed in raising prices, they're baked in on that. Another example would be a stock exchange. The stock exchange is baked in because their revenues tend to be a proportion of the total value, nominal dollar value of the shares traded. And so they're in many ways inflation protected. So there are businesses that have a far easier time in an inflationary environment. And you kind of ideally want to be in those businesses for all sorts of reasons.
So here, Guy is essentially telling us that the number one thing you can do to try and safeguard your portfolio from inflation is to make sure the businesses in it have a competitive advantage. And beyond that, his tip is to think about the business models. Do they make money in a way that is inflation-proof? Guy talks about credit card companies, where they simply take a percentage of money spent. Thus, as people spend more, because things cost more, a Visa or a MasterCard automatically makes more. Or even beyond that, are you looking at a business with such a strong moat that they can simply pass on price increases to the end customer? For example, Coca-Cola last year raised their prices as inflation hit hard, but did their sales fall? No, they continued to rise. So that's a really smart idea as to how to protect your portfolio as best you can from inflation. But with inflation also comes higher interest rates from central banks. So how should we be thinking about this high interest rate environment in 2024?
So especially high growth businesses, as interest rates rise, their valuations can come down very, very dramatically. And so there's a question that arises, yeah, okay, but if they're inflation protected, what should I do? I would tell you that it's reasonably clear to me that if you have the expectation that interest rates will rise, then there is a very high likelihood, even on non-growth businesses, that their valuations will come down, and that's not very pleasant. And I think that over time you make it back because they will be able to raise prices in line with inflation, and their earnings therefore will grow faster. But those two things work against each other. You can make a very good case for saying, well, wait for interest rates to rise, hold on to your cash, and then buy. But what I choose to do, because that's just too hard for me, because that gets too close to kind of like timing the market. So what I choose to do is I just say, I want to be in these businesses. I'll try and buy them at a good valuation. I don't want to waste my brain cells thinking about inflation. And so I just decide not to think about it and say, well, if I'm in a good enough business and I've given some of the criteria that I'm using to try and select them, then I should be fine no matter where interest rates are.
I found this clip from Guy really insightful. The unfortunate reality is that when interest rates are high, valuations on most businesses fall. That's the reality of how macroeconomics plays out. But he simultaneously acknowledges that interest rates are one of those things that's just completely unknowable. And to try and time the market by predicting what interest rates will do is a fool's errand. So I really like his approach. Instead of trying to predict the macro, which is top-down thinking, instead focus on each individual business, which is bottom-up thinking. And if you can find businesses that do have those competitive advantages and you can buy them at reasonable valuations, holding those businesses over a long period of time is, in Guy's eyes, the simplest way to get around the pain that is short-term variability and a rising interest rate environment. So with that said, how does Guy approach his own investing? How's he positioning himself for the year ahead?
What I do is I do something that I would call barbell. So imagine I'm a caveman and, on the one hand, there's a really, really juicy bison and what are those big elephants? The prehistoric elephants were called,
Mammoths or something like
mammoths, exactly. Tasty meat, lots of it. They're out there. The only problem is to go out hunting for that stuff. You need to go out and there may be saber-toothed tigers and all sorts of nasty animals that can kill you. So it's dangerous stuff. Now, deep back in my cave, I've got a supply of dried fruits and I've got a supply of maybe some grains that I've managed to pick up. And those are like deep there and they're safe. And where I want to sit is I want to sit at the mouth of the cave. I want to have lots of stores behind me that if storms come in, if lots of nasty tigers are out there, I can stay inside the cave or close to the mouth of the cave, totally safe, and I can eat. And every now and then when the conditions are really good, or if a juicy mammoth comes real close, I can go out and try and get it. What does that mean in the portfolio? Well, the back of the cave are the things that even if the apocalypse comes, will still be able to feed me. And we've got, in my case, I've got things like Nestle in there as the best example that I like to give, but I also have American Express and I have Bank of America and I have Berkshire Hathaway. And then, I go outside the cave, so to speak, and I go and hunt for things that could be multi-bagger investments. So in my case, I go out and I look for India Energy Exchange and I look for Care Ratings and I look for these situations. Seritage would be another where I could make many multiples of my money, but I might not. And so that's kind of like, it's a sort of like barbelled approach. You've got your safety stuff and you've got the stuff that could generate huge returns. And that works really, really well for me. And I feel very, very comfortable with that. But all of my long prelude was to say, that's what I do. And you need to see that in the context of who I am and where I am. That doesn't mean that you should do it, Brandon, or a listener should do what I'm doing. Take it as an example, don't take it as advice.
So ultimately, that's the approach that works best for Guy, given his own investing landscape. But I think there are some good lessons to be learnt there for everyone. The first thing is that he follows Buffett's first rule of investing, which is don't lose money. And he does that by having the really solid foundation of super stable long-term businesses in his portfolio that protect him from any potential economic storm. But then with that safety in his portfolio, that also enables him to watch for those infrequent opportunities where you could strike gold in a sudden situation. Now, this is certainly not financial advice, and please remember that this might not be right for you, but Guy's approach is very similar to what I do with my own portfolio. For me, my solid foundation is not Nestle or Berkshire, but it's a simple S&P 500 index fund. And then from there, I look for companies like an Alibaba or a Google or a Meta that get beaten down heavily sometimes, and sure, they might struggle, but they also might double or triple my money over time. So that were my 4 key takeaways from my chat with Guy Spier. Going forward in this kind of investing environment, you need to firstly understand your own investing landscape and your own circle of competence. Then to combat inflation, you need to hone in on the business model and ensure the business has a competitive advantage where it's naturally inflation resistant or can pass on price rises to customers with little consequences. Thirdly, don't get sucked into watching interest rates rise. Just focus on bottom-up thinking, hone in on a solid valuation and think long-term. And then lastly, remember Guy's approach to having the grains and fruits in the cave behind you, and then from there, keep an eye out for those big, infrequent opportunities to get a mammoth. And with that said, I wanted to say a massive thanks to Guy for once again agreeing to come and join me on the channel. Please leave any comments or messages to Guy in the comments section down below, and I'm sure he'd love to hear them. I'll be sure to pass them on to him. You can also watch the full unedited version of the conversation over on the Young Investors podcast feed if you'd like to hear more from my chat with Guy. But with that said, guys, that's all for today. Leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you guys in the next video.